Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to the View Up Here. I am your freezing host, Canadian Glenn, and it is December 7th, 2016. Right in the middle of the first real winter attack of the year. Get ready, Eastern Canada. Get ready, Midwestern U.S. It's coming. It's mean. Tonight, a welcome back to Politics once more. This show started off as, well, we were going to talk about what happened south of the border after November 8th. And as everybody is seeing, what's going on down there, some of these quote-unquote promises made by the president-elect seem to be falling by the wayside rather quickly. And then we just expanded that onto, well, let's talk sunny ways, shall we? We're going to take a look at some specific cases. How have politicians changed the definition of the word or the term promise? Does it mean anything anymore? Is it just not what we thought it meant? Or is it just a slogan? Well, we'll talk about it. We'll look at a few problems. And we got promises on them. Guess what? Didn't solve no problem. Sometimes it made more problems. Imagine that. We're here from the government. We're here to help. Right. Oh, well. That was rather confusing, I think, to explain the show, but whatever. We've already had our fun for the night for getting on the air. Now we're on the air, and now also on the air. Politics.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello. How are you tonight?
Cold.
Has hell frozen over?
Well, you know, I can see the North Saskatchewan River from where I live, and it's freezing over fast. Faster than I've seen it in probably the last 5 or 6 years, guaranteed. But it's almost minus 30 with the wind chill right now here, so what do you expect?
You got that all week too, don't you?
Oh, yeah. We don't want it for a day or something. Let's have it.
Well, come on. You know it's going to be 13 degrees next week, and you'll be out in your shorts again.
Oh, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near that until maybe April here now.
I don't know. I've been in Calgary in December, and it's 12 degrees. And it was. I think it was the only time I've been in Calgary where it didn't snow. The rest of the times it snowed. May, August, you name it, it snows.
Well, that is true. We'll finish up on the weather. Being an Edmontonian, I have seen it snow every calendar month of the year in Edmonton. Doesn't last when it hits the ground, but I've seen it. And Calgary, they get Chinooks. They're different.
Yeah.
When I lived in Lethbridge, we got that too. I mean, I remember having to work in Fort McMurray and phone my roommate in Lethbridge, and there was a 40-degree difference in the temperature.
Well, now over coming from the West Coast, it never changed much. It's always pretty mild throughout the year, so it's kind of bland. But living back east now, where you can get plus 12 to minus 12 within a day sometimes with the weather here, and that's amazing to me because you're either melting or you're freezing.
Never stays at one or the other.
Yeah.
Oh well. Well,
So,
that's kind of indicative of what we're doing here because the meteorologists seem to have lots of promises for us along the way with this type of weather, and we know how reliable they are.
yeah.
So we're going to kind of look at the same thing. As I said in the intro, this kind of started out that we were going to take a look at the U.S. election, but things have changed a bit since then. It seems that the Trudeau government seems to be, shall we say, exposed on a few things since we last talked. Would you agree with that?
I say they're quite. I don't think they didn't expect. They wouldn't be climbing some hills on some policy issues and trying to meet some promises. It's always easy to promise on the campaign trail, but the reality of governing can be quite ugly sometimes. So what's that saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah. So, but again, not too surprising. As you say, this is not something that's original to a government or too much of what we're seeing lately, whether it's from media, weathermen, or politicians. On that note, and so we're what, a year in now, just over a year, and things are humming along. I think this has been a little more feistier of a session than the previous one. Now that the shock has worn off for all the parties, to be honest, the shock of governing for the Liberals and the shock of losing to the Conservatives and the shock of who the hell are we of the NDP. I think they're starting to find their footing, and over the next year when we finally get some leadership people in places of head in the other opposition parties, I think we'll start seeing some more stronger pushback as the new leaders stake their turf out. So the Liberals better get used to it. There's a lot more uphill climbing to do.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, we will kind of get around to assessing the value of your common political promise, but the more you make, the more you're going to break, the more you're going to ignore, the more you're going to forget, and the more that somebody can put back in your face. And there's no doubt the Liberals made a lot of promises.
And the thing, too, is with being Liberals as well, is in the big tent of promises that you have, because you look at the Conservatives, they're at one end of the spectrum for their promises. It's easy to meet those goals and keep their base, and then same with the NDP, though the NDP is a little more diverse, I guess, in some of their sense. They have a fairly wide spectrum there as well. But when you're in the middle there and you're trying to govern on each side, you're going to be hurting a lot of people's feelings, because there's a lot of expectations coming from either the more left in the party, the center, who's just like, whatever, man, just don't blow the place up, and the right-leaning that's still pushing on some of the, and I'm talking real more, I think, leaning toward the progressive conservative side on fiscal issues. They're not going right-wing, right? But so there's a big spread there, and I was just actually, Eric Grenier put out the new numbers on the polling, and the Liberals are still holding. They're still at +8. I think, where'd my notes on that go? I was just writing them down because I thought we'd see a bit of a decline at about 5%. Some of the things that have happened over the last few months and that. But yeah, they're holding strong, 48.7%. And the CPC are cratering, the NDP are losing, the CPC is at its base, it's holding. So nothing they're doing is making any headway there. And not even the little games they're playing with the order paper questions, which trapped themselves. I don't know if you saw that report. I I think David Aiken might have written it, but it was another one of those order paper questions from the day the Liberals took over on hair and makeup. How cute. And some other costs, right? So they're trying to trap the Liberals in some kind of, ooh, we got you, you're spending money on hair and makeup, and they're begging it's Trudeau. But unlike Harper, who actually used hair and makeup and billed it surreptitiously through Mike Duffy and whoever else, we only scratched the surface there. But anyways, it ended up catching Chris Alexander and a couple other guys on their training for their staff for leaving government. And they spent something like $100,000. And, of course, you're going to say, if you're leaving government after serving there and you're going to go in the private sector, you're entitled to some job training. A lot of the public sector unions get it. That's political position. You're not really promised too much when your government gets turfed out. So, anyway, you don't have an issue overall with the cost. But it just shows how cute the Conservatives are trying to be entrapping the Liberals. And it's such bullshit, because all they have to do is focus on the big issues, the pipeline issues or spending issues on real things, in these departments or in the new reconciliation stuff or holding their promises. But they're wasting so much house time on these order paper questions, just trying to dig up anything so they can claw their way back into power. It's just sad.
Well, I did see that story. I saw it today. Yeah, I did see that. Just to comment on that specific tangent, I think it reveals exactly what parts of the Liberals' platform belongs to the other two parties.
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about the pipelines, the Conservatives have nothing to say. Absolutely nothing. The interim F-18s, nothing to say. Not a word. Of course, the NDP are all over those two. But then, and the NDP is trying to catch the Liberals on they're actually using the two-word phrase, broken promise. They're trying to make this a thing. Yeah. And it's the wrong time of year. I'll tell you that. I mean, there's no other way to explain it. It's December. Canadians don't want to get pissed off at Ottawa right now. They just don't.
No. They're busy. They're distracted. They're shopping. Anything right now making news is going to start getting washed away. But Charlie Angus has been making some great stuff. There was with him and Bennett on some of these First Nation issues, and now of course he's going to run for leader, so he's starting to do a little more politicking on that. But the difference I noticed with the NDP and with the Conservatives as far as opposition goes, and despite Mulcair's little rants there, or whatever he's doing, but they ask about people in Canada. They ask about people who aren't doing well. They ask it, and all you get from the Conservative side is more pipelines, energy, gotcha, just games. Sometimes you can't even watch, and I really appreciate the work that Katie and Dale Journal Smith does. He does a great recap, and Aaron Wary, if you ever don't want to watch QP but want to see what's going on, they put the right amount of snark in there, and it's balanced, but it's just they don't take it seriously. Whereas the NDP, despite whatever's happening with their party, they still fighting for other Canadians' voices there across the country. It's not so centered like in one specific region, as you see the Conservatives with Alberta. And Alberta's an important province. They're all important provinces, but this is all they have, and it almost makes you cry to see what has happened to the Conservative Party, because you just don't have these logical voices, and if they're there, they're not being heard.
Well, I think this is kind of a result of Election 42, and the NDP figured it out that they quit listening. They quit listening to their own staff. They quit listening to their own ground forces. They quit listening to their traditional voters, and look what it got them. So now they're going to get back on that, because, the convention that they had here this year in Edmonton surprised the caucus and the party administration, nobody else, just them. So they understand that they have to, for lack of a more polite term, wake the fuck up. But the conservatives, with what they're stuck on, they know they don't have a whole lot of growth. So they got to make sure they keep what they have.
Yeah.
Because I think they understand how close the Liberals are to them on a lot of economic matters. And for the smarter conservative base, people like to be with a winner, and it ain't that far off, So I think that's the difference.
Well,
one's appealing for their own benefit, for the party. We must rebuild the party. That's the conservative thing. Meanwhile, the NDP is more like, we're sorry, Canada, we do care. They're more open right off the bat, and I think that's the difference in the presentation.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Yeah. Who do you think, I've been watching, I have caught some of the QPs, and I've been finding that Cullen is especially effective, and of course Angus, and the rest of them in their script reading makes me want to stab a pencil in my head. Oh, even when it comes from the Liberals, I hate that stuff. But the Conservatives, it just seems so childish. And the only one, Scott Reed's quite good. And, but I find that when Bergen gets up and the contempt and this, it's just a game and these attacks. And it's just like, there's just no creativity there. And, Rempel's pretty straightforward. She's very good if it wasn't such a game to her sometimes, when she's trying to be cute and, seem important. More important than she actually is right now in caucus. And there just doesn't feel like there's real direction in that party. And if there is, it's still coming from headquarters. It's not coming from the MPs themselves. And it makes you wonder what's guiding that, there. Who's still making the decision. And the interesting thing, and, we'll probably touch on it when we go into the leadership battle for the Conservatives, is Trost and the tweets that Rona yesterday. I can't believe he's still in caucus. Like Harper, you look at what happened with Jurgis and Jaffer there. For what? And what they got treated like for any kind of disrespect to the man. But now you have an MP, a leadership candidate for the party, who has openly defied his leadership, all for the few rancid votes of the Rebel fans. Is that the hill you want to die on for your party? It's just
yes.
insane. It's just
for
and,
for Brad
and
Trost, yes.
You can tell how crazy it is when you have traditionally conservative-leaning pundits going, "What the hell?" like losing their minds. And it was interesting watching that show. So I don't know how the party's going to handle that going forward. But like I said, we can touch on that a bit more once we get into our conversation. So anyways, yeah, fun times. But, there's still some strong performers. The rookies are still getting up to speed, I think, in the House. And I think in the spring, when the House gets back now, like we talked about before, we're going to start seeing some running the pot issue will be coming, and as well as some other big ones, and moving forward on some of the missing and murdered Indigenous Women Task Force and those other big promises. So I think, coming this spring, you're going to see some real fire on moving forward on a lot of files, because this is where you're going to drop anything bad or push anything through, because that'll give you 2 years before election to clean up any of the debris that might fall out from that. So they're just getting started. It'll be interesting to see how what happens after the Christmas break.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing that they've put out in year one is electoral reform. In my opinion, they're not handling it well.
No.
This website they put up is a total joke.
I would disagree with you there. I think I did the little test, and you got to remember, it's not meant for people like yourself or me who have some interest and have some knowledge on the system. So I think it's a good start for people who are okay, I want to know a little more about it. How do I think about stuff? What is where do I land on that? Like even for myself, I was curious because, as I've told you before, I'm just not 100% in on any method really, and I'm still looking at it. Basically, I'm at the point, okay, whatever the people decide, I'll probably go along with that, But I think I don't know who your friend circles are, but I know with mine, I have about 10% of my friends are really involved in politics. 20% pay a passing interest. The rest don't have a clue. Tell you what our method is right now, except for the guy with the most votes wins, which is not what it is. and, I like seeing, speaking of Dale Smith again, pulling his hair out about 338 individual elections. So it's interesting that even amongst the experts, there's still no consensus themselves on, he's got coin thrown out some kind of ideas, and I'm actually surprised he's not in favor of first past post. But even amongst conservatives themselves at that level in the media, there's still no consensus either. So
well.
What were you hearing
Depends.
at your town hall that you went to? You said it was mostly PR, right?
I actually did go to one of the town halls that Minister Monsef had. And I found it to be highly scripted from beginning to end. It was worthy of a corporate PowerPoint ranking of 4 out of 5. There was very little time for people to actually speak to the entire audience and get on a record.
Yeah.
They really didn't want people telling them what should be done. They wanted to put people in groups and have them expend any, momentum on each other instead of the people there from the government. And then we would come up with a consensus of the group and someone would read them. That's bullshit. That's called turning down the volume. And this is what I see this website doing. You mentioned people that have no idea about alternative voting systems.
Mm-hmm.
How is this website going to teach them anything about alternative voting systems?
But that's not what it was for. It's about seeing how do I feel about how things are, what things will be. Like, so do I want, what was one of the questions, do you want a government to have all the power and whatever accountability, or several parties to have accountability and make a consensus? And so, okay, yeah, I like that. Okay, well, this is sort of, I read an interview, I don't know who had it, with the guy that did the survey, McLean. It was McLean's that did it. And they had some questions about that. And it was quite interesting about why and how they had done the questions. And so this is not the only step. So if I thought this was the only step, I'd probably have far more concerns. But for now, I think it's a decent exercise just to get people thinking about how they feel. And then we'll get into an education system about the different methods for voting, because that's what I want to see before anyone thinks about a referendum and updating referendum rules. Because with the deal that the NDP want to go forward with to have PR or whatever, now they will support a referendum. Well, you can kill it. It's not going to happen. Once it goes to referendum, I know exactly what's going to happen because I saw it happen twice in BC. It's happened elsewhere that tried to have it. And if you don't reform those laws for referendum, no change is going to happen.
Well, they're going to have to come up with a new act for referenda because the last time we used it, it's out of date. It just doesn't work right now.
There's no
That's
limit
one
on
thing.
corporate donations or third-party donations. Much
That'll
less any
change.
reporting of those donations, and that's the biggest part that concerns me as well. And because
that'll change. It'll have to. That'll have to change. There's no way that anybody
that means that we're not going
will
to have
accept
a change in the election system before 2019. And so
it can be done.
Trade-off?
It can be done.
So, yeah. Oh, it'd be tight. It can be. And for how much the Liberals have hinted, this is not the end of it. So I don't know if they'll just bring in something and forego it all and take the political heat. I don't know. So that's the biggest question.
This is something I talked about with Vashi Kapelos when I had her on, and she's agreed that everything now is a public consultation. And this is just a matter of using time and getting too much data to actually move at more than a tortoise pace on any of these promises. This is a deliberate strategy to slow everything down.
I mean, if you're going to do that kind of stuff, this is when you do it before you start putting policy into place. So if they're still doing consultations going into next year and so on, then you're going to start having some problems because you're running out of time to deliver. So it's only so long they can do it. But this is what they said. We're going to consult. The thing we got pissed off about before, the other guys, they didn't consult. So how do we want to have it?
Well, they never told us about this step. They told us about the committee touring, they told us about the minister touring, and they told us about the individual riding town halls that were supposed to happen, which only 2/3 did, and there's no penalty for that, apparently.
Well, and the thing, aside from that, but even the ones that they did have, like the one in my area, you only had one choice of a time. So it wasn't an all-day exercise where...
No.
So you're not accommodating a lot of people. And if you're in larger cities, it's one thing in a rural area too, but in a large city, that's still quite a ways for somebody to go from one end of town to the other for a couple of hours.
Well, they don't care.
They
don't care.
I mean, I completely agree with you that it was not rolled out well. They should have been far more explicit, and I can't help but think that Monsef's a little in over her head, right? And, they needed somebody that had a firm hand on, I'm not saying she's naive or guileless, I'm just saying she's in over her head. This is a massive, massive undertaking. And, she's got some decent qualifications, but you think somebody like LeBlanc or somebody with far more experience could have pushed a lot of that stuff through, and giving up the seats on the committee to give the opposition a majority. I think it was basically, fine, you guys want it that way? Have it that way. I think the Liberals knew exactly what was going to happen after all those freaking games setting up that committee and the tantrum from the NDP, Elizabeth May, and the Conservatives about the Liberal majority on that. Because you can bet if there was a Liberal majority on that, you'd have an entirely different report.
Yeah, and it would probably favor alternate vote, and nobody likes it. So I'm fine with what they did with the committee. They set history. It was a very good message, and they still haven't burned that political capital. They almost did when Monsef basically accused the committee of not doing their job. But they certainly did, because I have right in front of me the publication that the minister handed out about what the committee's mandate was. And it was identify and study viable alternatives to the current federal electoral system, including preferential ballots and proportional representation, as well as mandatory and online voting. Consider potential changes. Conduct meaningful and extensive consultations with Canadians. Invite all members of Parliament to hold town halls. Study and advise on additional methods, obtaining the views of Canadians. So the mandate of the committee was 200% filled. And she had the nerve to get up in the House.
But they didn't come up with one method. What they came up with was a hodgepodge method.
It doesn't say to. It does not say to.
Okay,
nope.
But I was reading, trying to think of who it was. It might have been Lagasse or Dale Smith, but they were talking about, with the agreement between the opposition parties and the Conservatives there, on going forward a referendum, what they went to was saying we can look at one of these two methods, either against first past the post in a referendum, or just going to a referendum. So I think there was I think in their rush to get a deal and put this together, didn't narrow it enough. And there was too much ass covering by everybody. The conservatives don't care. They don't want first past the post to go. They just don't care. So they'll push for the referendum, and that's the only thing they push for. They brought nothing to the table aside from that. Scott Reed, I'm sure, worked very hard, but that was his orders, and that's all he did. Elizabeth May probably worked pretty hard on that, and she has her own method, but even she's had some misinformation, and she's getting corrected on some of the things that she was saying from the people that study that, like Ann McFarlane and Lagasse and Dale Smith. And then the NDP, of course, want PR because they're in it to save their lives and their seats. If they don't move to a method, they could get sucked up by the Liberals, unless there's some big scandal that sends everyone back. But again, you go back to the Conservatives, who cares? They want first past the post because they know how to manipulate that. The Liberals tied themselves into a corner, so now they're like, how do we save our asses without wearing too much political debris? And the Bloc's just like, yeah, whatever. We're here. We're not going anywhere. We got Quebec. They and this is what's my concern with some of these other methods when we talk about, I think of that saying, don't wish for something too hard, you just might get it. And I say that in that sense that, okay, we look at PR and the different makeup, and there were some very good points put out there that, one, if you've got some of these governings and you're dealing with proportional representation and deals are being made, coalition governments, who's held accountable? And in some of the regions that do something like this, you have one sort of majority or minority government, and the players on the fringe change. So they might align with one of these other groups that are a smaller party one year. Next election, they're aligning with one of the other groups. But it's still the same people in power, and there's no way to toss the bums out, so to speak, because they'll always have some form of power if they have enough of the votes. And if you're in that big middle, you will. And then there's, I have these horror dreams of a rebel media party and a fringe of Ezra and his groupies getting in and holding 5 or 6 seats in a PR type of situation, or AV. And I think, how do you ever get those guys out again? And so
what?
No, but these are my concerns, right? And so I'm thinking, and this is where I challenge myself. Okay, which method if it came down to it, and I had to vote in a referendum, which way would I be voting? PR or AV or whatever that other alternative? I mean, are they going to vote between all three on a referendum? Would that be the choice? What if we end up in a 3-way split and you got one choice of 33%? So I just don't know how they're going to, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people regardless at the end of this battle. I don't see how it works out for anyone.
Well, first of all, I think the biggest problem is, in your analysis, you mentioned how it would affect every party. That's the problem. It should be about how it affects Canadians.
Yeah.
That's all it should be about. But it's not. And again, here's this rhetorical promise.
Yeah.
Their loyalty is to their parties. That's all there is to it. And it's bullshit. And yes, there is a lot of problems with the referendum. However, why is nobody talking about how Elections Canada 15 years ago could have ran this entire campaign to inform Canadians of what the deal was, but after Harper they can't, and nobody's saying a word, nobody's doing anything to,
Those are some of the changes that have been, I don't know if that bill's been tabled yet, that part of the electoral reform, but
Nope.
BC is getting its powers back and being moved back into its own office. It's not going to be under the prosecutions anymore, and they're allowed to educate again. So that's all going back to the way it was. So the only thing that's not settled now is how we vote and online voting and those types of issues.
Well, online voting's not going to make it, not at this point in time. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. That was the interesting thing on the survey when it asked me that question. Like, I like the idea of online voting, but I have some serious
Not yet.
security concerns, especially with what's happened down south now. And so, yeah, I'm willing. I'm not in a hurry to replace that right now.
And the mandatory voting, it's simply not enforceable. It becomes a weapon, is all it becomes. So forget it.
Just think of the guy going into the polling thing because he doesn't want to get a fine and saying, well, I'm going to vote for the worst guy possible, just as a big FU, right? You have to encourage people to vote and make them want to vote and give them something to want to vote for. But as I mentioned, I mean, we mostly work on a throw the bums out kind of methodology anyways, and, well, especially at the local levels, but, to some extent at the federal level. But, it's, I don't see, that's, again, on the survey, that was one of the questions about mandatory voting. And I'm like, I don't think that's something I'm worried about too much right now at this point. It was good to have good turnout last time, so that was encouraging. Hopefully we can keep those numbers going up, too.
Well, we kind of jumped topics. We went to electoral reform first, but, that's fine. But as far as the promise angle goes here, I'm not seeing it done from my own personal experience with the minister and what they're trying to get out there with the riding town halls in this part of the world, and with this website. They're not treating it like they're providing solutions. They're treating it like they're making a diagnosis. That's not what they said they would do. That's not what people voted for. People didn't vote to answer 20 questions and be told how they think. That's not what people wanted. People wanted to see alternatives and then pick one. I don't like the way they're doing this at all. If I would have saw the categories that you get at the end of that survey before I took it, I could pick the one that I got. Is a complete waste of time. It taught me absolutely nothing about first past the post, never mind the alternatives. It is a misdirection. And I think that's the way they want it.
Yeah, this is one of the ones I just, I have no idea how this one is. I don't know how they save it, for one, or two, get it to a viable spot, or do they just write up legislation and say, this is how we're going and what's that going to look like, and let the conservatives have a heart attack over a referendum? Or do they strike some kind of side deal with the NDP on PR or some kind of hybrid model, which has been talked about? So, because there's been some, again, amongst those who know and study this, like Legoss and Dale Smith and a few of those other much smarter than me people, they're looking at the size of our country, how big the ridings would be. Can we come up with a solution that takes those challenges into consideration? And we get a method that's going to be fair to cities and rural, the size of the riding, how they're represented, how many are being represented, and is their voice still being heard in Parliament, however that looks. And then we go into the constitutional side of that, and how does Quebec fit into it? How do the territories fit into that? And what will they agree to? So I don't know if it's in the Liberals' best interest to keep things so uncertain at this point. They're going to have some direction coming back from the break and saying, okay, we tried something, it didn't work, we're big enough people to say that, or they're going to get some information through this survey again, we could be surprised, and say, okay, this is how people think about our system we're going to take the political hit and not go anywhere with it. Nobody's going to give a shit except for the diehards. Or they come up with a solution and surprise the hell out of everybody. And that could happen. We've been surprised before. I can't call it. I really do not know what they're going to do with this particular file or how they're going to be able to please many. They will not please all. And it will be interesting to see which party will benefit from that. Will it be the NDP? Will it be the Conservatives? Or will it be the Greens?
I just wish it was Canadians.
Yeah, no. No, it won't be us. It will never be us. I'm not that optimistic.
As far as platform promises go, so far, I consider this the biggest lie. There's just too many angles for them to derail it if they choose to.
Yeah.
And they've engineered that. And they're the Liberal Party. They know how the House works. Which is unfortunate. But that's one thing. Now, a big promise that's been around, well, I mean, for those in the military, it's been around for decades. But for most Canadians, it's been around for 3 years now. And this is the problem of sexual assault and sexual violence within the Canadian Armed Forces. There was just another big survey that came out, I believe, last week, or a couple weeks ago at the most. I mean, it was 2014 when this started, where there was a published report. And
I think that was Maclean's that did that. They did an amazing report. That was, you think back to journalism, and that was excellent journalism again. Maclean still hits it out of the park, I tell you. I encourage people to give them a look for sure.
Yeah, some of it.
Oh, but that's what I like about them. It's a variety of voices, right? I don't want to hear an echo chamber. So they still, with Marty Patrick's Quebec corruption, stories and those kinds of stories, including this particular one with the sexual assault, that was a hell of a report to read. So it's nice to see that some action, however slow, is coming from that. They're bringing that public focus onto this issue. And, as you know, I have family and many friends that serve in the military. So I grew up in a military town. So I've seen much. And, it's really shocking, those numbers that came out in that report.
Well, to demonstrate the legacy of promises, I mean, people think, well, this is the military. They're not politicians. Well, I've spent enough time talking to Pat Stogren, and I tend to agree with the retired colonel. And he said anybody who gets a star on their shoulder, who becomes a general, is no longer a soldier. They're a politician. Yeah. And I would tend to agree with that. So, I mean, when this came out in April of 2014, the chief of the defense staff at the time, Tom Lawson, said that sexual misconduct is not tolerated within the military, and it's a message he intends to reinforce throughout the chain of command. And the defense minister at the time, Rob Nicholson, says he's ordered Lawson to get to the bottom of the matter. It has the potential to tarnish the credentials of the Conservative government. See, there you go. Conservatives, right off the bat. Hey, this could make our party look bad. Never mind the people in the forces. Never mind Canada's reputation. Hey, this could make our party look bad. You better fix this.
Oh, I just
ridiculous.
Literally smacked my head on that. And and Lawson, he was just a puppet. I've never seen anyone so out of touch in that kind of position. You look at Rick Hillier or Nanchuk, or they had so much more.
Dallaire.
Yeah, Dallaire. I mean, just incredible presence, and they bent to the political will of the day, but I've never seen anyone bend like that. And Lawson did nothing. And then you could tell in that press conference he was furious. And holy crap. And
Well,
I'm much more
let's not.
hopeful with that than I ever was with Lawson, that's for sure. And the second thing is
Okay.
now you got Sejan, who actually served, aside from McKay, Nicholson, Kenny. And Kenny,
Yeah.
what the hell does the guy know about military, much less sex? So,
He wanted to shoot a gun.
Holy shit. And so anyway, so I'm a little more hopeful now. And part of, I watched that press conference, and they said, okay, now when the survey came out, my friends in the military kind of snickered a bit, right? Because, and it's not just men who are predators there, and let's make that clear. They happen to be the bulk of the predators, but there's a lot of aggressive women as well. And if you spent time on some of the ships, and there's a lot of booze, which has changed now in the last couple of years because of some incidents down in Hawaii there, and San Diego, getting rid of the booze might help some of the problem now. But there's still a fair amount of it there because it's going to take a while to change that culture. However, now they have a baseline, which is what they were saying. So they're doing this again, and they're expanding it. It's going to go out to the cadets and the military college and some of the other departments in the spring. So they're going to get some more data there too. And then they're going to retest the survey with the main group that they did before to see, has there been any change? Has there been now, right? So that they can actually have some metrics to go by. And then the third part of that is it's going to continue too. So hopefully they follow through with that, because if you don't have the numbers to look at in your face, and it's good that they were released as well, even though I think the report got delayed a bit, that will also help people come forward too. But the other challenge that I'm hearing from my contacts in the military is sometimes it's not just the aggressor that gets charged. So if there's a complaint, someone goes to complain, they could end up being charged as well. So where's the protection for that? Or for false accusations, because those have happened as well. So you have to make sure there's safeguards there. But the culture has to change. It has been a very rough culture there, and it started changing, of course, with gays and homosexuals, and then women serving in higher roles as well. But we're probably about 5 or 6 years away from seeing any concrete change, because things move slow. And as the old people retire and the old generals go away, and you start getting new blood, more diverse blood in those higher ranks, then you might see a more expedited change. But it's still a man's world, including in the military.
Well, let's not jump too far ahead, though, because I want to highlight this promise bullshit. So in 2014, when Lawson was still at the helm, his statement was, "Sexual assault is a crime. It is an abhorrent and corrosive act that goes against the entirety of our military ethos. I do not accept from any quarter that this is merely a part of military culture. It is not. Sexual misconduct of any kind is not and will not be tolerated within the CAF, and this is a message that I reinforce throughout the chain of command. We will pursue any and all allegations of sexual misconduct, and we will protect complainants from reprisals." Bullshit. This is what he said that day. He did none of that. He made a promise right there, and he did none of it.
And the reason he didn't do any of it is the powers that be, like Kenny, didn't want to do it because it took money, and they were bleeding the military dry. I think, what was it? Billions of dollars sent back. And White Cross? You could see the frustration in White Cross's face, too, when she was dealing with that. And the way she was treated at those initial press conferences. There was no desire for change.
Well, I mean, it took them a year to come up with 10 recommendations from an internal report. Lawson was still at the helm. This is April 2015. Here are the recommendations. Acknowledge that inappropriate sexual conduct is a serious problem that exists. Acknowledge it? What? Like, they have to recommend that they acknowledge it. And here's Lawson saying that it's not part of their culture, and they have to be told to acknowledge it. Okay. Establish a strategy to affect cultural change to eliminate the sexualized environment and to better integrate women, including by conducting a gender-based analysis of policies. Create an independent center for accountability for sexual assault and harassment outside of the CAF with the responsibility for receiving reports. So they said they're going to set up an outside agency. Allow members to report incidents to the Center for Accountability or simply to request support services without the obligation to trigger a formal complaint. That was another problem that was obvious. And then there is a recommendation to work with this center that they set up. Like, they have to be told that? This is unbelievable.
Oh,
and they're told to simplify the process. I mean, there had been decades of rules, regulations, and culture built up that allowed this sort of thing.
And a major problem within the forces itself is the members do not trust the military police. And so there was that big fear of reporting anything or where it might go or who, there's some big issues there. Like, this goes even above and beyond the usual political bullshit. This is deeply inbred within that system. So if you have victims who don't want to report because of blowback, and this goes for men too, you're not going to have very many men feeling comfortable about the majority of those complaints in the recent survey was of sexual touching. So there was a small amount of those were flat out sexual assault, like rape, but still too many. So the sexual touching thing is, and I've got stories from male friends in the forces of being in the mess, hanging out, doing whatever they do off shift, playing video games, having drinks, they go to the mess and what have you, and having like a female who's loaded, and most of the guys are loaded too, but they're taking their tops off and sitting in the lap of a married guy who's very uncomfortable, but then he's got the pressure from his buddies around him, and what's that guy doing? Is he reporting that as a sexual assault, as unwanted touching? Is he going to embarrass, maybe she's a friend of his? So there's that. I think there's so much more that wasn't reported, right? Like, I think those numbers, once people are more comfortable reporting, coming from both genders as well as women, I think you'll see those numbers as well rise as people get more comfortable. I think, as they mentioned in this, it's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's likely. And then, in July, so just 3 months after that, being told to acknowledge they have a problem, now we have General Jonathan Vance as Chief of the Defense Staff. And this is what you were talking about. His quote that came out of this press conference was the command structure is either blind to or tone deaf to sexual misconduct. He said, just how anybody.
The command structure. That is huge, too. The command structure.
Anybody,
like, everyone else is blaming everyone else, but.
His tone was a little different than General Larson.
Oh, yeah.
In this case, we have an important failing in our institution that we have been blind to or tone deaf to the pain and the suffering and the damage it has caused inside our ranks. People have had to go to work with that feeling in the pit of their stomach that they're going to be abused or disrespected. It's tragic and it degrades the force. The buck does stop here. I am the leader of the armed forces, and it's a leadership issue. So, I mean, that was the report done by former Supreme Court Justice Marie Deschamps, and
Yeah.
the description was endemic
Mhm.
and tolerated by the highest ranks.
Yeah.
And that's where Lieutenant General Chris Whitecross, the highest ranking woman in the military, was given the plum of dealing with this Deschamps report. And, you know, as you said, I mean, what a position to be put into
Mhm.
for
Yeah,
Whitecross. But
she's just been promoted too. She's the first woman Secretary General in NATO.
yes,
Yeah, great for her. Well, and then you look at the comments from the other day from Vance, and you know, he said, "I gave an order to every member of the armed forces that this behavior has to stop. My orders were clear, my expectations are clear, and those who choose or choose not to follow my orders will be dealt with." So now they've said they've removed 30 people from supervisory posts. Now, what have they done with them? Have they, you know, some, I think 18 have been booted out of the military completely. And
there's also been some pretty public prosecutions as well.
Yeah.
And we never used to see that.
No, and some of this is being done by the civilians as well. This hasn't just been through the military themselves. So, and this leads back to what I was saying before as well, because there's a lot of distrust that these were not being investigated as best as it could have been. And, I mean, you look at some of the issues with the missing and murdered Indigenous women cases with police not taking them seriously, and these types of issues, again, playing out within the military themselves because nobody was being taken seriously as a woman in some cases, or everyone's pals, or it's an old boy club. And it was the same in the RCMP, too, with their abuse cases. And you look at Paulson, who denied, and then all of a sudden change of government, and he has a complete change of stance as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's someone I'll be happy to see gone once his term's up, because I don't think he's been a good leader either. But going back to this military, so now, okay, Vance, has he been in there a year now? Just over a year. And so now we have the survey. What are you going to do? Are you going to be standing here in a year's time saying, I can't deal with the problem, we still have a problem, no change? Is this going to be a promise broken again with another CDC, another defense minister? We'll see. You know, it's I don't.
Well,
and they wonder why they can't recruit, right? They wonder why they can't get recruitment numbers of minorities and women, and now, you know, of course, the vulture lawyers are all circling around a class action now over the treatment of homosexuals and women in the military and these assault cases. So unless government wants to continue forking out huge settlement claims, this is in their best interest to solve this, because it gets expensive in the long run. It ruins people in the long run. And next thing you know, you don't have people wanting to come and sign up to serve in the military or in the RCMP or wherever else you need them, because there's zero trust. And why do that?
Well, we're still getting the promise that was fraudulently given by Lawson in 2014, but now with Vance, the tone has changed. Even what they say has changed. It proves that they're informed and they're not afraid to publicly say this is going on, which is a change. It's a definite change for the military structure to do that. We have a problem. That's not supposed to happen. But, you know, it's disappointing that 2 years was wasted, but I'm willing to wait and see what General Vance can get done. And, of course, he will need the cooperation of his minister. And, you know, as you've said, that was a bit the biggest problem in the Conservative administration. The minister couldn't care less, is what the
No, it's
reality
political.
of it
It
was.
was political coverage. There was no. I mean, I think McKay had some buy-in with the truth, but Nicholson didn't. And Nicholson was a nice enough guy, but he was a puppet. He had no buy-in. And then Kenny, he's a political animal, and it was photo ops and re-election. It had, and cutting and making sure those cuts went through and laying that political pressure on the military. He was the only one Harper trusted at that point in time, because you remember this is when Duffy was exploding and all this bullshit was going on. That 2014, 2015 with Harper, right? So St. John's got a lot of problems to solve in the military, but I think it helps he's served. And I can't say I'm going to agree with everything that comes through, but the relief in some sectors of the military is huge. I mean, I think they tend to lean a little conservative. Normally, some of the groups I'm in for retired military guys, I see that. But I also think there's a little more optimism. But again, promises. If you're not going to keep those promises, you're not going to build that trust, and nothing's going to change. So the heat's on Vance. I think he might get it done. But again, we'll have to see the hard numbers. But I like the change. The one change from this with the independent center where people can report is they can go to military police or they can go to the civilian authorities. And that was the big change that needed to happen. So if they're not comfortable going to military police, there's that option. That door is open there on the civilian side, which I think many are more comfortable with. And I think that also will come to training too. If Vance can say everything he likes, but you have to have some hard training in that military police on how to handle these complaints as well. And that things have changed. It's not being handled in the same way it used to because it's not acceptable.
Well, sooner the better. We've hit the halfway point, and as agreed, we will be taking a short break. Alrighty.
See you back in a couple minutes.
Yes, you have exactly 4 minutes. Some Canadian music. The title of the song is applicable to what we're discussing. So 4 minutes, Headstones. We'll be back with Polytext after this. Welcome back to The View Up Here. Welcome back, Polly. Hello. Was that sufficient?
Oh, yes, more than sufficient.
Excellent. The next promise, time will tell. This may prove to be the most contentious promise broken, and not everybody feels it's been broken, but there's certainly a lot of people that do, and these are the promises involving the federal jurisdiction on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the campaign trail, we heard how the Prime Minister was campaigning that he understood that the National Energy Board was a stacked organization and it wasn't fair, and he would change it, and he would stop all assessments in motion, and everything would be reassessed, and there would be a new way of doing things. Well, there's a lot of people this week that feel like that is a broken promise with the approval of Enbridge Line 3 and Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain expansion. This is going to be, we're seeing people saying it already. This is going to be Canada's Standing Rock. This is going to be Oka. This is going to be, a hill that people are saying they're willing to die on. We've got over 30 mayors in the Lower Mainland. We've got, I believe it's 60-some First Nations. There are people along the route of Trans Mountain from 100 kilometers west of Edmonton all the way to the terminal in Burnaby who are organized and who are not in favor of this. We've, some of the promise, and we have COP21 and the proclamations of the government and the Prime Minister that Canada is back, Canada is a leader. yet we're getting these decisions. Isn't this just a little confusing for the average Canadian?
Oh, no doubt. It's a complex file. And you're right. Some people, I'm sort of ambivalent. I think the last time we talked, this was pretty much what I predicted. What was going to happen? NGP was dead, and Energy East might get approved. I wasn't sure about Kinder Morgan. I really wasn't sure which way that would go because it had been so far along in the process. I didn't think that they would kill it, but I knew that Line 3 would be a go. That one was an easy one for them. It's an existing old pipeline. They're upgrading it, expanding it. It's going to be safer than it was, so fair enough, right? That's okay. But with Kinder Morgan, the thing that interests me the most on this one is how it's playing out as well provincially between Alberta, BC, and I'll touch on that at the end, but we go through the promises. So as far as the NEB board goes, again, we had some stacking of the deck there before the Conservatives got out of town, so I'm not sure how easy it is to replace some of them. Nobody wanted to step aside, but I think what's happened is they're expanding that now to put in some more moderate thinking type folks. Well, we'll see. Depends who gets appointed. But so I'm not sure where that one's going to go. I don't know when all those contracts are up for the people that got reappointed or those appointment dates are up. I think some go right into 2019. Like they were really far-reaching. On the other hand, you have a lot of First Nations against, but I was reading today, CBC had a story out on some of the First Nations who support that, who, one reserve has no unemployment. Their people are making $100K a year. They want to see this go through. And I think in Northern Gateway, Trudeau alluded to this in his speech yesterday at AFN, which was actually really good. And I was surprised because usually he's not so eloquent on some things, but it was actually, nobody walked out. I guess that's good news on that side. He had a good speech about how you're not always going to agree. He's got chiefs in the north mad at him because he turned down Northern Gateway. He's got chiefs in the south mad at him because he approved Kinder Morgan. And for me, I'm ambivalent on Kinder Morgan. I have, of course, the concerns on the ocean side of things. However, on that side, we have a new ocean marine plan coming into play, but I haven't seen the details on that. They've just announced it, so we'll see if it has any meat when they actually table the bill. As far as our COP21 and Paris agreements, again, there was another report today that with the new emissions caps being brought in, the phase out of coal in Alberta, and this is the big deal for these pipelines, is Alberta bringing in their carbon tax and the emissions cap coming in. There's also new emissions cap or methane emissions. So this is coming from the beef industry. So there's going to be some changes and some environmental laws there coming into play, as well as a bigger commitment into green tech. So if that works out, these pipelines aren't going to affect our COP21 agreements. However, you need to make sure that those emissions are coming down on the other side. So I think this is a much bigger plan and a much bigger picture than, okay, yay or nay, what's going to happen here. And then just to touch on that provincial side of things, you have a Liberal Prime Minister praising the NDP Premier for bringing in a carbon tax in Alberta, and Alberta under an NDP and a Trudeau government federally got two pipelines approved in Alberta after 10 years of PCs and Conservatives couldn't. And you also have a carbon tax in Alberta, which you would never have had before. Well, I think maybe the PCs toyed around with something like that, but of course chickened out or never bothered chasing it seriously. But now the interesting side is how this will play out in BC. So we know how NDP and Alberta feel about these things, and you were there. You were at the NDP convention in Edmonton, weren't you? So you already saw the fissures there within the NDP itself on approving some of these pipelines and not. And there are a lot of trade unions and NDP voters who support this. And I'll just look back into my own family. My father's a trade union guy. and he did not support the BC NDP in the last provincial election because of Adrian Dix saying no to all the resource jobs like LNG and some of those other things that were coming around. And they went green because he was so angry at the NDP. So the NDP in BC have to deal with the trade union side of their party against the public service union side of the party, who CUPE and the Save Our Water folks are tied in with the Dogwood Initiative and some of those folks who are very much against these. So he's turning himself into a pretzel, but he's coming out now saying, I'm against it because the Greens are starting to build up some profile in BC. And so if Horgan says, I'm against the pipelines, the moderates are going back over to the BC Liberals for the economic question, which is what it will be. But if he says, okay, I'm for the pipelines to try and keep some of that trade union vote and that moderate vote, well, he's going to lose a lot of his Green side to the Green Party of BC, who are having some internal challenges right now. But this BC election on these pipelines is something I'm watching very closely with a lot of interest, because it's going to be very interesting to see how the public at large supports this. So BC is not just Vancouver Island, there's Lower Mainland. And yeah.
No,
really,
in the BC provincial, yeah, the whole province does come in to actually matter as opposed federally, but there's a common factor here with the BC provincial, and that's the Clark government. Even back to Liberal government with Campbell before her, they've pulled their Ralph Klein routine. Yeah. And they're going to be held accountable for it. You know, you talk about, well, you know, LNG, well, it was all bullshit. It was all bullshit. It's not going to happen. So that's going to be what the BC election is about. It's been 10 years of lies that are disappearing for everybody to see. But the BC NDP loves snatching defeat from jaws of victory. They should have had it last time, and they failed so spectacularly. It was shocking how bad. Yeah, there was a lot of help with the corporate media and the Liberal ad blitz at the end of the campaign.
Dix was losing his own people. Dix was losing his own people in that. And it was just like my parents, who were 13-year NDP voters. And they would never vote BC Liberal, ever, over my dad's dead body.
The second half was that the BC NDP listened to the same clowns that ran the federal campaign.
Yep.
In 2015. That's why. Yeah. That crowd is gone. They are all gone, finally. Mulcair, once he's gone, that's it. None of that strategy team from 2013 to 2016 is left. They're all gone. But remember Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
Before the election in Alberta, the NDP had 4 seats. Mm-hmm. They now have a majority with 64.
Yeah.
So it can be done. And the only way it was done in Alberta is because people finally got pissed off of being lied to, and it was so obvious. And there wasn't even an attempt to cover it up. The right was fractured in Alberta for a decade before that.
Yeah. Well,
Wild Rose is never going to be government. Wild Rose is never going to be government.
And then, you know, I thought it was sad to hear about Jim Prentice. I might not have agreed with everything, but he seemed like a decent enough guy. But wow, talk about a spectacular failure in Alberta there on that. Speaking of promises, right, with that floor crossing there. But again, they couldn't get pipelines built. They couldn't get anything done except waste money. And like you said, the bums got tossed out. But the dynamic in BC now with the stronger Greens is if they peel enough of the votes off of the NDP, but they're peeling from the BC Liberals too. So who are they going to peel more from who's going to come out there. And that's, the Greens could surge. You could have a Green minority government with an NDP opposition if the Liberals don't manage to run a strong campaign again. And how people will look at what's happening there. So how Kinder Morgan plays out in all of that will be quite interesting, and seeing where those lines are drawn. I don't know if our map will change much, maybe in the Lower Mainland a bit, but Victoria always goes NDP, maybe some Greens, and rural will go back BC Liberal. I don't think the BC Conservative Party will be a factor right now, so
no.
I don't see them split in the right. They're a freaking hot mess right now, so as usual. They're like the rebel media of BC politics. Yeah. So as far as the MPs, though, for the Liberals, they're like Bennett and there's another gentleman, I can't remember his name. His writing's right in there. They haven't been muzzled. So we've seen some statements come out from them, which I think was not unexpected. I think they're getting some leeway from the powers that be, because you can bet the powers that be would be putting their foot down if they didn't want any kind of dissent. So I think there's some leeway there for them to speak up. Now, on the other side of Kinder Morgan, though, when you look at the energy markets worldwide, like we're seeing the OPEC finally agreeing to a cut, but there's other players coming on board. You have Trump coming up in the South, and we'll probably dig into this later on some of his cabinet picks and whom they support, namely the one Pruitt. I showed you that story earlier. That's a big concern. And Keystone came up in that story. That one's interesting, along with some of the names linked to whom Harper's been speaking to. So this turns into an interesting Canadian side story there alone. I was going somewhere with that. My train of thought just left the station. So anyways, so the moves that are happening ahead down south and then going into India on the demand side, because the whole reason for getting these pipelines to, especially Kinder Morgan, was to reach the Asian markets. And, well, India just built the world's largest solar farm. And, like, it's huge. You see more of that happening across India and going into China as greener tech starting to take a foothold there, but consumer demand as well. And, you know, the one thing about pot legalization that interests me is what's going to happen with hemp. Are we going to see a resurgence in hemp products replacing oil-based plastic products?
No.
And how might that affect demand on some of those products too? And I know that's not going to happen overnight, but when it replaces some of the other things, is there any interest in that? Are you going to have these oil corps dominating and lobbying still to keep that out? So I don't know where that will go. But will Kinder Morgan be needed in 5 years? I think it was that 5 years they're going to have the online. So if the demand's not there and there's no profit because it's so intensive to pull out of the ground, will it even ever come online?
Well, I mean, this is the issue I have. Harper pissed away a decade with these projects. It's too late now. It's simply too late. I mean, you know, is Trump going to approve Keystone? If he can, he probably will, because he just doesn't give a shit.
No, he's got an interest in it.
Yeah, but I mean, he doesn't have any thought beyond his own. You know, this is the issue. You have a megalomaniac who is going to be sworn in as president, and the first concern of his in anything is how it affects him, nobody else. So, you know, what do you expect? But this, I don't know. I think, you know, nationally, I see the electoral reform wobbling as the biggest standing out broken promise, quote unquote. But as far as regionally goes, this Kinder Morgan is going to be a real problem from now until the next election. It's not going away.
No.
And you wait. The money will show up to fight it on every level. The money will show up.
Oh, I have no doubt. And the court cases. Forget about the money alone on just the protesting. It's the court cases, because I think there's still 2 outstanding court cases going through the courts right now on Kinder Morgan, plus on the right to consult up north with Northern Gateway. And they're, like, I know people who work for Enbridge who have been working really hard up that area, doing a lot of outreach and visiting all the towns and the First Nations and doing that kind of work on the ground. So there has been some change from the previous government to how even Enbridge partnered with Alberta when it came to crafting this environmental policy, as well as the poor Burman, as well as there was a wide range of voices on, I have to give Notley some credit for getting this put together and for the outreach she did to oil companies and getting as many of them as she did on board. And I think she
didn't have
a
choice.
Yeah, she just said to them, you're not getting pipelines unless we come up with a climate plan. And this is coming from the feds. So tomorrow, actually, or no, Friday, Trudeau meets with the premiers. And they'll hammer out the Pan-Canadian plan. The Pan-Canadian plan. Hello, I'm tripping over my tongue. With, of course, Brad Wall dissenting, but nobody gives a fuck about what Brad Wall thinks at this point now, because the rest of the premiers are on board. And then comes the healthcare one agreement. So we've had how many meetings with the premiers now? 3 or 4 big meetings with the premiers and 2 strong agreements coming out of that. And I mean, that alone in itself is an amazing thing, because as you know, with Harper's approach, it was one off them and play them off each other. Like you have about 5 kids and you're telling them all they're your favorite. So, but we know Alberta was always his favorite, except Toronto when he needs votes. But
only Brad Wall's still playing that game now.
Yeah, so and he needs that distraction from some of the scandals building up around his little neck of the woods there. So tomorrow, it will be interesting to see Friday, what the premiers have to say and what the agreement looks like. What are the hard targets? What are the numbers? And where is that work going to happen? So, and will Brad Wall be the only center? Who knows what's happening out of Atlantic Canada with some of their approaches like Newfoundland. So, and they're
I think New Brunswick will be the problem there, because the Irving family owns the province. But the thing about this, though, they can say whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
It's only going to go so far with people. People want to see results. This is the issue. People, even though we change government, people overall have not gotten any patience back from the feeling they had last October. They didn't just vote for change. They want to see change.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the problem. And this is where these promises have come back and bite the ass. Because the one thing I wanted to say to end this is, before Jody Wilson-Raybould was a member of Parliament and the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada, when she worked for the UBCIC, she stated that British Columbia would not accept pipeline projects destroying the environment, traditions, ethos, and First Nations of the province. Trans Mountain is approved. Minister Raybould? Hello? Hello? Crickets. Absolute crickets. This is not damage control. This is, we're doing this, tough shit, we gotta go. That's, you want to talk promise and the definition of it, and as far as BC is concerned, you look no further than that statement right there. This is a big, big impediment to sunny ways that the Liberals put there themselves. And as you said, they didn't sell it worth a shit. They just come out and did it. They just come out and did it and walked away.
coming from a sales background, one of the biggest things, one of the first things they ever teach you is to under-promise, over-deliver. Because you can't write checks that your ass can't cash. And this is how you lose your clients or your customers, or in this case, your voters. And the Liberals are running out of time before the other parties strengthen once they have their new leaders, or maybe not, depending if the Conservatives take broad trust. They have to have this stuff nailed down. They have to have that credibility within the voters. And they've had a lot. They're holding strong. But these polls that I was quoting earlier, that was taken before Kinder Morgan was approved. I'm curious to see what those numbers will be like next week. And I think we'll start seeing some slide back to the NDP. And especially if they start getting some strong candidates too, because what Grenier noted in his article for CBC on those numbers was it's not necessarily having transitional leaders. Bob Bray managed to bring the Liberals up quite a bit into a challenging position before Trudeau was picked. And then he carried on from there. So Bob Bray fixed a lot of the Liberal Party damage after Nadia and let the healing. With Mulcair there in the NDP, we're not seeing that. But that could change once that new leader's picked, and the Liberals will run out of gas. So I'm not surprised Rachel Wilson's a bit quiet right now. She's also managing some other major files, so pipelines aren't technically really on her thing. But with her riding where it is and her past, I think she was at that press conference when they approved them. Yep. But it would have been in the Liberals' best interest to have her saying something. Now, I know she spoke to the chiefs at AFM. I did not see her speech. I'd have to look that up, so I can't say to what she's spoken to or not. However, there's going to be a lot more on this. I mean, this is not something she's going to be able to hide from or try. No. She's going to need to do some work within the ASN themselves, too, to bring some of those dissenting chiefs on board as well and find those solutions. Because we don't want, Standing Rock, that being said, I took a look at that one. Holy crap. You could see the obvious change in that route that came away from the good white people city to go right underneath a major water source. And we saw what that can do with Saskatchewan, who did the same thing. They allowed that pipeline under that water source of that river with sketchy environmental plans. So if there is any kind of screw up on this, okay, fine, you've approved it, you said you're going to have this top safety, you're promising us world marine safety spill plans and all these other bullshit, and there's a bunch of conditions attached to Kinder Morgan. So just because they got approval, they also have to meet those conditions, and those are some of those conditions. So again, still not a done deal. But if anything goes wrong, if there's any kind of an accident, you're never going to gain back that political credit. And you will be the ones that wear it. So they have to be damn sure that they're covering all the bases here, because it could blow up and be a major problem. And not just for them, a major problem for that BC coast and any governments after that. Because, you kill off that tourism industry. That's a major part of BC's income, not to mention the way of life for many jobs and people, not just First Nations. This is not just a First Nations issue. And so, I see some bumpy roads ahead.
I think the best possible play, if this is his plan, it's not going to go anyway. Kinder Morgan is $43 billion in debt. Yeah. And the market ain't looking that great. I mean, this is another one of these lies that I just can't believe. If we get our mud to Tidewater, we'll get more money for it. Really. So you're going to put another 1 million barrels on the market a day of low quality base stock, and you think you're going to get more money. This is
I think as it stands now,
it's bullshit.
It's bullshit through the U.S., and I don't know. I don't see how it's feasible, especially with
the
changes I talked about earlier. So, but again, they're a business. Would they invest that much money if they didn't think there was some payoff at the end? They wouldn't.
Well, the
So
issue is, no, the issue is they know their industry is dying and they own all this crap in the ground. They want to get something for it before it's worth nothing. And the more they can get governments and taxpayers to pay for it, all the better. That's it. The race is on. And Canada is the backyard of the oil world. Everything is buried. So they want to get it out of here while they still can, because the price differential is never going to disappear. There's only one way, and it's the way Peter Lougheed wanted to do it. All the refineries are here. We ship oil. We don't ship diluted bitumen. That's the only way it could have been done.
I had for somebody who was talking about this, and that was, I think there's some people, including Christy Clark's ex-husband, that are invested into a refinery in BC. And I'm not sure where they are with their plan, though. It looked like it sounded fairly reasonable. But what do we do with that gas? So if we open up some refineries in Alberta, what are we doing with that gas to get it to market? Are we piping it? Are we sending it by truck? Are we sending it by train at this point, which is more flammable? So do we not incur some dangers doing it that way as well? Is there not a higher cost or a higher threat with that particular type of fuel still shipping it and shipping it unsafely?
Well, the issue is diluted bitumen has a very low flash point because of the diluent that's put in with it. I mean, it's basically diluted tar sand mixed with kerosene is basically what it comes down to.
Well,
and it also sticks to things and it burns. It's like napalm.
I think Miss May had some really interesting views on transporting dilbit without diluting it. Sorry, I shouldn't call it dilbit, but bitumen in trains, because she said if they spill, it comes out in a chunk. They can put it in a way so that if there's a spill, now I'm not sure how much credence I'd give that theory, of course. But
the issue is that the rail cars would be about twice as expensive. And that is an issue. That is an issue with all oil production. They can talk about safety and environment all they want. When you work at those places, number one issue is production. That's what's most important. That's all there is to it. So, that's why pipelines leak. You can build a leak-proof pipeline, except it would be 5 times more than what they build now. So it's never going to happen until oil's $200 a barrel. So I mean, this is the issue that nobody ever talks about, and government never talks about, with all these approvals and processes and all this crap. They never talk about that safety has a price on it, because it does.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where, like we saw in Saskatchewan, when corners are cut, and that's what happened there, and Brad Wall is hiding those reports on investigations because there wasn't any investigations. Or the investigations have said there's serious problems here, and they knew about it and did nothing. Not to mention his recent land deal issues. So we still don't have any answers about that massive spill that tainted water in that river, or why a pipeline was allowed underneath that river in the first place when it could have gone over safer ground. It would have crossed the river at some point. So corners were cut, and we saw this with Mount Polley. We saw this with the tug spill up in Bella Bella. We realized with a spill like that how unprepared we were. And so BC and the feds have got to come up with a solid plan. So we know there was an announcement with the Marine Safety Plan. We have the Northern Ban now. But what's going to happen on the South Coast with the increase in tankers? And currently, I was flying over the islands one day, the Gulf Islands. I was coming into Victoria from Vancouver on float plane, I think it was. And you should have seen all the tankers and freighters. It wasn't just oil tankers. There was other freighters there waiting to get into the port of Vancouver. I think there was a strike at the port or some issues were happening there. so it was taking longer for ships to get in and out. And there's 5 or 6 of these huge, massive freighters anchored in amongst the Gulf Islands. So there was no federal jurisdiction on safety issues. Things were the noise and stuff that was affecting some of the smaller communities like Chemainus and some other dangers. Some of these ships are older. We've had derelict vessels, and coming up and down some of the like the gorge in Victoria with derelict vessels too. People live aboard, dumping sewage into the gorge there that you could swim in the gorge, and there's some areas you don't because of that. So what's that marine plan going to do, and how is that going to ensure that we don't have a massive accident involving these new super freighters? If they don't bring people's mind to peace, well, we don't know, again, what's going to happen if they just can't.
The reality of the scientific reality is there is no known method to remediate a diluted bitumen oil spill on land or water. There is no known method. But yet we have to do this yesterday. Now, it's the same thing with reclamation up in the tar sands. They talk about it. They spend 30 years on a football field-sized piece of land. And yeah, it looks like what it should look like. But it's a football field size. And it took them 30 years to get it to look like that. There's 4 million other football fields out there that look like the moon. So, this is something else that nobody wants to mention. You can't clean this stuff up. We don't know how. That's it. We don't know how. That's the bottom line. So if it spills, well, we don't know because we don't know.
You're such an optimist.
Well, I mean, that's the reality of it, though.
Yeah.
And I mean, spills happen. You have to accept that. I don't think it's realistic or
Well, it's a
honest.
matter of when, not if, right?
Well, yeah, as long as we're out of office, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of the base problems. But then, that's a good segue, talking about
swamp,
who's in and out of government, and as long as it happens once we're out of Dodge, who gives a shit? Yeah, we have the president-elect, who was named Person of the Year by Time Magazine today.
What the hell? He got the most votes. No, I bet you Hillary got most votes. They just, politics, right? Time, they could have put death. I saw a fake cover for Time. They could have put death. Death took so many big names. But now you've given Trump the front page of Time. He's probably jerking off in his gold bathroom to that right now.
Well, I mean, you have to understand their pure definition of Person of the Year, the person who made the most news, good or bad. I mean, previous Persons of the Year have been Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong. I mean, it hasn't been a happy Hall of Fame. So, I guess there's a little bit of forbearing in that if you want to look at that legacy of the award. But, talk about breaking promises. There could be a record involved with this government. We'll have to see. But for someone who went around for a year publicly saying that he was looking out for the working man, if you look at the people that he wants in his cabinet, I think right now, there's been a couple more announcements today. I think we have 4 billionaires and 6 multimillionaires into, 9 digits. And this is a government that's going to be looking out for the working man, is it? Somehow I don't get it.
Well, you look at some of these names, and it starts with the Conway, Kellyanne Conway, and her links with the Mercer family, who are, you don't get much more elite than that. And they fund everything. And these are the people that, when Harper was down in Vegas meeting with Adelson, who do you think is defining who these people are coming forward? People like Sessions, and the Scott Pruitt. I shared you that article of Scott Pruitt and his links to oil. And did you read that? I just about fell out of my chair. I went, oh my God. And that was just the latest. It was just today. He's going to head the Environmental Protection Agency, and the guy is in the pocket of one of the biggest oil and gas guys in Oklahoma. And the corruption, the whole deal with writing these letters to this Attorney General group that's in the pocket of big oil. I mean, did you see the linkages up here, though, during the later Harper, when they were all gasping and dying, and the links between some of these players and what was happening? But this group of attorney generals, and it still amazes me how they elect them down there. So that aside, and then you get into this DeVos character and her stance on education. And then, I mean, every time you turn around, it's one worse than the other. Fucking Ben Carson for urban development and housing. The guy is he said, I'm unfit for public office. I know nothing about the federal government. Oh, here's a nice big full of money department for you. You kiss my ass. Just shudder at it.
Well, it kind of looks to me like for every department, for every choice for secretary, picking someone who has been against that department, its entire purpose. You know, we have a Health and Human Services nominee, Tom Price, who's a Republican congressman from Georgia. Mm-hmm. He's an orthopedic surgeon, and he wants to get rid of Obamacare like yesterday.
Well, and so does Sessions, so does
well, yeah,
Pruitt,
but I mean, this is a guy who has led this effort and is a doctor who wants to remove that, and he wants to nominate him as secretary for the department that administers it. So I mean, this is so obvious. DeVos for education. Well, DeVos for education, who has homeschooled all her kids. She's a billionaire. She funds every campaign to defund public education. She's the sister of Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater. They have very deep ties to Amway, another infamous organization. And she's going to be Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
And she wants to shut it down.
These are all linked back to the Heritage Foundation, the Kochs.
Yep.
Like the Mercers, the DeVos, Koch brothers. I don't know. Did you have a chance to read Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, yet?
No, I haven't.
Read it. She has linked all these people together. The bullshit foundations that they run, like the Heritage Foundation, Americans for Prosperity, and the other millionaire names, the Freedom Partners, and what have you. She's linked all of them, the Koch brothers, and the other conservative money. It's excellent. And there's a little mention of Canada in there, too, if I recall. I'll have to look that part up again. But like the Fraser Institute and some of these organizations that the Koch brothers found. So they're the ones driving this behind the scenes. And when you look at some of the choices being made, like Ben Carson, that was probably, okay, Trump, you can have one or two of your own. But I think somebody just pointed out something about Pence on your chat there. Is Pence is the one doing all the heavy lifting here and organizing all this. Trump's posing for pictures. He's on Twitter. He's watching CNN. He's watching He's watching to see how many times his fucking name is mentioned. He doesn't give a shit about the rest of it. He wants to know what his stats are. How many people are looking at me today? You have Jared Kushner running the show. His son's running the show. His daughter running the show. And Pence running the show. And the Mercers running the show in Conway. Trump's just sitting there having fun with it all. Is my name big? Was I mentioned? Oh, look, I'm on cover of Time. Oh, it's a
Well,
disaster. Oh my God.
that's why I've always said that he's Benito Mussolini 2.0. It's the exact same crap. I mean, the promises that were made about making America great again, whatever that means. The promises that people won't, you're not going to get ignored anymore. You're not, we're going to listen to you, and we're going to bring jobs home. Like, this stuff is so just blatantly false. It's unbelievable.
Well, look at all those people who voted for Trump and are going to lose their Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And I mean, you want to feel sorry for them, but they believed all this bullshit. It was such bullshit. And you had fact-checking from the Times, and you had fact-checking from the Post, and some brilliant articles by Kurt Eichenwald, and the news was out there. But these people are getting their news off these fake InfoWars sites, and I had people sharing some of that stuff. I'm like, dude, don't share that stuff. It's crap, right? It's racist crap. And some of this was coming from my friends in Australia or my friends in Britain. There was a lot of these posts of make Britain great again, Britain for vets, but it was all anti-immigration stuff. And of course, leading up into Brexit, and we saw where that went. So this reality TV, social media mindset that people are just suspending reality. But these are the same people that, I don't want to say any wrestling fans out there, but they're watching wrestling and NASCAR and are low information voters, and they follow these religious guys that say, send us your money, and they're doing the phone shopping stuff. Buy one, order the second one, and get third free, or they're buying Rebel Media coffee cups and paying for cruises, There's no thought going on, and they just take the stuff in and go, well, it must be true. And we know that Hillary Clinton was far, far, far from perfect, but she had some solid plans. She had some experience. She had, common sense. That didn't matter. It just did, but she still got more votes. So now you're looking at this weird, 2.7 million votes more than Trump is an astonishing number. So here you have a guy who doesn't even have a mandate, but for some fluke through the Electoral College and some gerrymandering and probably voter suppression is going to be sworn in as president, and the man's a fucking moron, and the autocrats behind him are reaping the benefits. And American voters have just been taken for the biggest scam in history.
Well, based on that scenario, I think there's nobody to blame except the Democratic Party. I think that a big factor in the Electoral College win was that there's an awful lot of burners that said, you stole this nomination, you're not going to own up to it, and so we're voting Trump. Fuck you.
I don't know how much of that is what happened, because you look at, she still got 2.7 million more votes. And even
but she didn't get them in the right place. She didn't get them in the right place.
And in some of those places, is what I'm saying, is there was voter suppression. You had, and then there's some question on some of the voting machines, but I don't know how much those would have played into it. But I'd have to look down into the data a little more. But a lot of the stuff that was being said, what was happening, wasn't the narrative at all. She did pull in some of these votes. She did pull in other votes. And then there were some of the Stein sisters, of course, we're not voting for Hillary no matter what. We're going to bite our noses off to spite our face, are in for a hell of a surprise. Oh, you don't like Hillary because you thought she was too beltway? Well, you got Trump, and he has now put in all the big names in the beltway, the same people who obstructed for the last 8 years, the same people funding. This is, again,
drain that
common
swamp.
sense. Yeah, and I don't know if Bernie could have pulled it off. I have some serious doubts. And he was a part-time Democrat. He only joined the Democrats to get the party behind him. So I have some problem with this whole bullshit that she stole that away, you know. He was a carpetbagger. He came in to use their resources and then got pissed off when it didn't go his way. And that's my feeling about Bernie.
Well, there are still millions of Democratic primary votes uncounted to this day. So they have problems. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah. Oh,
but
they need to.
If we're going to finish this, if we're going to finish this, that means we're going into overtime. I'll tell you that right now. All right, let's move on to the Canadian circus. We now have 14 people declared for the leadership of the Conservative Party. By the end of the year, if they're going to be in for real, they have to come up with $50,000.
Yeah.
So far, we have 1 out of 14 who has paid that, and that would be Michael Chong.
Oh, I
Maxime
thought Leach had paid.
No. Maxime Bernier. No. Kelly Leach, Deepak Obrai, Andrew Scheer, Brad Trost, Chris Alexander, Stephen Blaney, Aaron O'Toole, Dan Lindsay, Rick Peterson, Pierre Lemieux, Andrew Saxton, Adrienne Snow, and Lisa Ray.
Who the hell
None
is
of
Adrienne
them have
Snow?
paid. None of them have paid.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I was looking at some of the information out there today. I think CBC had something about the fundraising totals, and I probably have that wrong. I'm not sure where I read that. But Maxime has the widest donor base. So he is drawing from all regions, of course, mostly Quebec, but he's got strong pull out west in BC. He's got strong pull in Ontario, and he's doing well in the other regions, which, based on the new way they're voting, is going to work for him. Kelly Leach has more money, but she's drawing mostly from Ontario, and more specifically, the Greater Toronto area. Must be all those elites burning holes in their pockets, right? Which is cracking me up, because Miss Anti-Elite is the most elitist of them all. And,
no kidding.
So with Rate, I don't know what she's waiting for. And I think, Kevin O'Leary was shooting his jack off recently, but he made some good points. And some of the points that he talked about was there's too many people on that stage. So he's like, I'm not even going in right now because it's a waste of money. It's a waste. He said, you can't get in to the issues. You get 50-second soundbite, and that's it. There's no time to debate. And what the Conservatives should have done, or what they should do for the next one, is have the top 5. Here's how you're polling. Here's how your donors are working. You 5 will debate each other, and then we'll have a runoff debate with the other 9. I think they did something like that with the Republicans. When they split up
it came down to money as well for the Republicans.
Yeah. So now Brad Trost is trying to steal some of Kelly Leach's sunshine, I think, and get the title for biggest wad in the run. Again, I speak to Rona's lack of leadership and tossing him, and even allowing him to continue on embarrassing the party, because that's all he's doing at this point now with the ridiculous rebel media bullshit and the supporting of lock her up. And I think J.J. McCullough dribbled out some crap saying, oh, the left spoke mean against Harper too. Well, let's compare Harper and Notley, shall we? Was Harper getting death threats and rape threats? And there was some on the left that go a little far there on some of the stuff with anyone, right? It shouldn't be said. But
well, it's just another false equivalency from the right. And
well, it was a distraction. And
that's what they do.
And I just said, holy, this is ridiculous to even compare that, because this is a tired old chant from down in the States. And you're applying it to Rachel Notley, who hasn't done anything wrong except bring in an unpopular tax, which how many other governments have done this before. I remember Texas, Brian. So until it narrows down, it's just a gong show, and you're just going to keep having these type of stunts coming out that Leach is pulling with Kuvalis there, and this whole Canadian values and garbage stuff she's throwing.
Well, the issue with Ambrose, I can kind of understand it, though. Her gig as leader is coming to an end, and if these clowns want to do this, go ahead. I don't really think it's up to her to control these idiots in the leadership battle, because they've all had to leave their critic positions. They all had to leave critic positions. They're just members of the caucus, and they can be as ignorant as they want. Brad Trost is a theocrat. He's in the 19th century, and that's what gets him elected where he lives. And he's nuts enough to think that shit can sell nationally. So if that's what he wants to do, go ahead. But I think there's a bigger plan here. I think they have so many seals up there with a ball on the end of their nose. I think they're purposely, some of them are taking very different paths to talk to the public, because it's all part of the bigger data collection for the party for the next election. They're just doing their duty, a lot of them, with a lot of the shit they say. Because you have some people like Chong, who just is always reasonable. He's always calm. If he doesn't like something, he says, well, I don't really see it that way. He's being very non-confrontational, being reasonable. Nobody else is doing that. Out of 14, nobody else is doing that. That's his gig.
Yeah.
Now, Trost is the real religious freak. Leach is the, white supremacist part of the party.
It's all a bullshit thing, right? Like, this whole anti-elitism is just, she's a well-paid doctor. She's a well-paid MP. She was in cabinet. She was friends with Flaherty and was given her writing. So it's just an act, and it's coming from Kuvalis. He's the one pulling the string. She's just wandering around like an aimless moral vampire, and he's good at what he does. He got Torian, he got Ford in, and I heard he worked on the BC.
But he's a one-trick pony. He's a one-trick pony, though.
Pretty much. And this is whole us versus them, getting her as much. But look at the media. They're printing every stupid thing she says and pumping her tires and getting her this recognition, whereas the other people, like Chong gets his name mentioned because he'll come out and put out some thoughtful thing, but it dies down. There's no discussion over it, unlike the reaction that happens with Leach. And this is what we saw with Trump down in the U.S. with the media. I'm going to say something utterly stupid and ridiculous. The media will report it as fact, like her stupid break-in. It wasn't even a break-in. Somebody tripped the alarm, but it wasn't from outside. So,
it's a stunt.
This is where I see where the Liberals are going to have some free line here with these kinds of games going on in the Conservative Party. And the NDP one hasn't even warmed up yet. Yeah. And I'm hoping that we see some decent debate from that side, but they're going to have their own challenges. But it won't be the circus that is the show right now at the Conservatives. And the poor NDP, and the thing that pisses me off most with what happened with them and their convention was the Leapers come in, push this document down the rest of the party's throat. Where are they? Not one of them is running for leadership. Not one of them has made any noise or anything towards the federal party. It's Angus. Colin's not going. It's Angus and it's Julian. And that's it. There is no one from that crew. Naomi, I forgot her last name now, and Stephen Lewis's son there. Where are they?
This is a whole nother issue. We don't want to go there.
Oh yeah. Anyway, but you know what I'm saying there is they're having So I don't know what will happen with the NDP side, but the CPC, they've got to narrow that field down. They're running out of time, and they're not going to be well served by having so many people on that. And I think the party here was more interested in driving donations and earning money than running a serious
That's all they're ever interested
leadership.
in.
Yeah.
I mean, come January 1st, this field of 14 is going to be down to single digits. People here are just not going to come up with the money. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
That's why right now a lot of them are looking for endorsement. And just in the last week or so, Bernier was endorsed by none other than Tony Panay. But, Andrew Scheer, the worst Speaker of the House in the history of Parliament, also gained endorsements from these winners, Paul Calandra, Peter Panashaway, and Marilyn Gladue. Oh, that's a stellar crowd.
Oh, my God, yeah. The only thing that jazzed that up more is Cheryl Gallant.
What a stunning array of support.
Oh, man.
And O'Leary. O'Leary's keeping his face in it, and he's got snide remarks, and he's getting the press he needs from that. And he said he will decide. He's playing the trump card. He's only going to enter if he thinks he's going to win.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot of respect for your other people in the race right off the bat. And, he did call it right, though. He plans to wait until the herd gets called by the natural Darwinian forces of finance. And I think that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And there's been question already. Chelsea Nash had a really good piece in the Hill Times this week and said that Quebec and Ontario are where the leader of the Conservative Party is really going to be decided. It doesn't matter where the base is, but when it comes to leadership, which is party members, all those ridings in Ontario and Quebec, they're going to have an awful lot of pull in who becomes leader of the Conservatives. And that makes sense to me.
Well, it is weighted, so you're going to have some broad organization. And what I haven't seen a lot of, or haven't really looked for it, is who is the party establishment behind. Those moves haven't been made. Now, the last leadership was in 2004, and if you read Harper's team, there was a lot of movement going around and stacking those executive committees. And we're seeing it with Jason Kenney and what he's doing in Alberta. And Harper seems to be focused over there, taking back over Alberta and helping Kenney out. So, but nationally, I haven't seen a lot. I don't know what's happening. They've kept their cards pretty close. So when that field narrows, we might see some more movement. They've set most of the rules, but I haven't seen too much other action as far as movement from the executive on this. And with Harper and Gerstein still holding the keys to the Conservative Fund, that's where you're going to want to be watching. Who do they put? They won't come out and say they're supporting people, but you're going to have to watch the actions that happen and see where that wind's going to blow.
It makes sense. I mean, I'm really curious to see how the Conservative Party tries to mend fences with Quebec. Bernier is the star.
Well, Deltel is their key. They're using Deltel.
They used to have a lot of stars in Quebec. Those days are gone.
Those were progressive conservative days, were they not?
For the most part. I mean, in the minority governments, Harper had a lot more MPs from Quebec than he had after the Orange Wave, that's for sure.
Yeah. The NDP have seen a lot of their support. That's gone back towards the Liberals, but and the Bloc's just holding pattern. But I don't know if Ontario and Quebec will be enough. BC is going to matter, and Alberta, of course, will still draw a big part of their base and their voting numbers. And how will that affect turnout in the other ridings? And that's the other key. Only 37% of the party who could vote voted for the leader. And that was Harper.
Yeah, I think that's another issue. They need turnout for this. I mean, having less than 2 out of 5 card-carrying members even bothering to vote for who the leader is, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign at all.
No, and if you read Harper's team was from Flanagan, because Tom Flanagan was his campaign manager, you'll see some of the methods that was used and some of those voter suppression methods as well against some of the other candidates to put Harper in place. And just a side note from that, we still don't know who Harper's 5 biggest donors were. And it looks like Kenny's playing that card too.
I don't even want to talk about that piece of shit, Kenny. Jason Gehring, as I like to call him, but that's another issue as well.
Yeah.
But as far as the promises go, we haven't really seen any positions yet out of any of these conservatives. We haven't seen any of this new tone, new direction, blah blah blah. Chong's the only one who's even tried to breach it. How many more
come
months?
Up with some interesting stuff, but again, I don't know how much I support it, but at least he's coming up with some policy.
No, he's just being a flat-out libertarian pain in the ass. Really, is all he's doing, and that's not going to sell. It doesn't sell in Canada. That's what I mean. That's another extreme position that one candidate is taking because they want to gather data for Sims. They want to know where everybody fits in on their spectrum because that's what the Liberals did. I mean, the Conservatives might be not a party that's going to advance the life of the average Canadian, but they sure ain't dumb either.
No.
And if, the Liberals changed the way they operate, and they spent a lot of time looking at the Obama campaign, and they found out how to use their data in a relatively short amount of turnover and make it pay dividends for them.
Well,
and the Tories are going to catch up.
Doing for a long time. The Conservatives already had this down.
But it was only their base. But it was only their people.
No, it wasn't. You look at to robocalls. That wasn't their people. They were putting
that's an election, no.
No. This is information that they compiled over years. And they were data mining social media. They were data mining surveys. They were buying surveys. They were buying surveys from change.org, and all that information went into Sims, and that's how they were able to target the non-CPC voters. Because when they go and do their door knocking and do whatever they're doing in their communities, all that information was being put into Sims. Those voter databases can pretty much, they know when you wake up, they know when you go to bed, they know where you work, they know how many kids you have, they know it is so invasive, that information that they have. Then that's not even going into the QR code surveys that they were running, hidden as advertisements of Canada. And they were getting metadata information as well from your phone through these apps. So the Liberals caught up finally because their databases were so out of sync and out of touch. They had no volunteer registration basis. They had all these different commissions doing their own things. And that's why the Conservatives were able to win 3 elections, was because the Liberals were so far behind. But like you said, they took notes from the Obama administration or campaign and were able to close that gap, and that's how they won this last time.
Well, it's going to be interesting.
I think there's actually some privacy movement going on now to make those databases come under the Privacy Act, because currently they don't.
I can't see the parties being in favor of that.
No, no, but it'll be interesting who comes out against it and why.
Well, it'll be up to the government to put the poo-poo on it because they're the government.
Yeah. So I think there's a good privacy thing happening tomorrow or on Friday too, I think. I don't know if it's the journalists getting together over at McGill there, but yeah, I'll have to keep an eye out for that and send that to you. Well, you're keeping me up past my bedtime.
Okay. I think we pretty much ran what we said we'd do. We're 14 minutes overtime.
Not bad for us. We're usually half an hour over. Well, always a pleasure coming on and speaking with you, Glenn. And thanks for having me. And I'm sure we'll see each other soon again.
Yeah, I don't know what the next big deal will be, but maybe we should be thinking maybe after inauguration.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be after inauguration, probably right around when the spring session of the House starts.
Mm-hmm.
There should be lots of shit in the air by then.
Oh yeah, I always love to stir the shit with you.
Very good. Evening, all right, thank you, Polly. Good night.
Cheers.
All righty. Polly Tix. That's her 4th appearance on the show. It's getting into sacred ground with Mr. Lawtons. Soon. All righty, that's it. I'm going to wrap it for tonight. No tune, no nothing. Promise. What does it mean? We know what it doesn't. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on The View Up Here. Good night.